Becoming a Recon Marine is no easy feat. Recon candidates are expected to endure a lengthy and difficult training pipeline that is physically, mentally, and spiritually challenging. In order to become a Recon Marine, candidates are expected to be proficient at running, rucking, swimming, the list goes on and on. But while candidates are focused on the bigger areas of physicality, it's often the little things that are overlooked that can lead to a potential drop from selection. One of these areas is knot tying. There are 12 knots that Recon candidates are expected to know how to tie before they step foot in the renowned Basic Reconnaissance Course. While knot tying might not sound like the most difficult obstacle, plenty of candidates have been set back in training, or even dropped, because they could not tie all of the knots to the instructor's standards. But don't fret. The goal of this video is to teach you how to tie those knots to get you ahead of the game and increase your chances of success. This is the 12 knots of Recon training. The 12 knots you need to know in Recon training are the square knot, water tape, double sheet bend, bowline around an object, clove hitch, round turn 2 half hitch, figure 8 loop, bowline on a bight, 4-finger Prusik secured with a bowline, directional figure 8, rappel seat, and the bowline around the body with a figure 8. Even if you're not a Recon candidate, many of these knots have real-world applications, and other special operations pipelines may require you to learn these. With that said, this video is going to be focused on how to tie these knots during your knot tying test out over at the Recon Schoolhouse, which means that we need to give you a few overview tips and pointers before we jump into how to tie these knots. Since this is a test out, there are specifications in these knots that need to be met for you to pass. We will go over these requirements on a basic level as we teach you the knots, but we're introducing these concepts now because they play an important role in tying these knots correctly. If you're an aspiring Recon candidate, feel free to grab your own rope and follow us along throughout the video. If you don't have your own rope, you can get one of ours over at our website, gendischarge.com. The rope we're offering is a 13-foot replica of the rope you'll be using in Recon training. It's a quality rope at the perfect length, and you don't have to go through the hassle of buying way more than you need. The link to our website is in the pinned comment and description below. The first of our tips and pointers is Roper Ready. Roper Ready is a procedure they teach you at the schoolhouse. Do this before you start tying any of the knots because it sets you up for success with your rope. Simply grab both bitter ends, trace them down to your elbow, and grab the rope that's around your elbow. Boom, you just got Roper Ready. Next up is your pigtail length. This is what a pigtail looks like. It's just the remainder of the rope after a certain knot. Your pigtail length in Recon training needs to be no shorter than the width of your fist and no longer than the length of your fist with a thumbs up. Next, watch out for crosses. Crosses are crosses in your rope. Certain knots are more prone to have these if you don't pay close attention. They look like this. Always double check if you have them because they are an automatic failure. The next tip is to find a round object to tie some of your knots around. At Recon training, you tie knots around the rope corral. Fun fact, the knot tying videos we filmed years ago back in our OG days were at the Recon Schoolhouse rope corral. This next one is important. The 12 knots we go over should be in the order of the test given over at the schoolhouse. Some of the knots build off each other, so if you're here to learn all of the knots, we highly advise you to learn them in the order we show you in the video. Lastly, keep in mind that in training you'll be tying these knots on a time limit. However, don't worry about those time limits just yet. If you learn how to tie these knots at a steady pace from this video, you should be able to comfortably tie the knots in the time allotted to you. Alright, with the overview out of the way, let's start tying those knots. The 12 knots are grouped together as joining, anchoring, middle of the line, and specialty knots. Let's kick things off with the square knot. The first knot we're going to tie here is the square knot with 2 safeties. Take the 2 ends of your rope and make sure that both of the sides are of equal length before you begin tying the knot. Next, take either end of the rope and go right over left, left over right, or go left over right, right over left. Essentially, whichever you pick, do the opposite of the first one. We do right over left on the video. So we go right over left, pull the rope underneath, and take that same end and go left over right through the middle. Now pull that tight. You should have a square knot now. Make sure it's tight enough to where you can't fit a finger inside the square knot. Next up are your safety knots. On each respective end, you gotta follow the locking bar doing an overhand knot. the locking bars go in different directions on each side. Make sure the knot is tight and snug on that locking bar. And of course, make sure that your pigtails are at the acceptable length. And there's your square knot. The biggest challenge with this is finding out how much rope you'll need to begin the knot to where your pigtails aren't too long or short. Once you tie this knot a few times, you'll get the feel for it and will be able to easily make the time limit given to you. Next up is the water tape. To start off with the water tape, grab an end of the rope and make a loose overhand knot. Make sure the running end is roughly long enough to meet the pigtail length requirement. Next, take the other end of the rope and trace it through the overhand knot, backwards, exactly shown on video. Once it's all set, begin to slowly tighten everything, making sure you don't get any crosses. And there's your water tape. Now we're moving on to the double sheet bend. The double sheet bend is one of the most important knots you'll learn in BRC, because it's literally the roper knot. Recon candidates will wear a double sheet bend rope around their shoulders for the entirety of training until they graduate, so making sure you can tie it pristinely is super important. We're going to show you the test out version of it, and then the roper knot. Alright. First, make a bight with one of the ends of the rope. Now take the other end of the rope and feed it from behind, through the bight, over and around it. Then you go through the first passover you did, going around the bight, and then literally do the same thing one more time, making sure that the rope stays next to the first passover you did. Make sure your pigtail is at the length you need it at, and then tighten the rope. That's the double sheet bend. Now for the roper knot. You'll notice it's the exact same thing, but instead of just using one running end, you use both of them. Make a bight and then put both ends through the back of the bight, putting it over and back towards you. Then you go under that loop you just made around the bight twice, again ensuring that there's no crosses. Adjust for the required pigtail length and tighten the knot. The pigtail lengths are a bit different in the video, but try to make them the same length. And there's your roper knot. You'll be tying this a lot if you find yourself in BRC. With the joining knots wrapped up, time to move on to the anchoring knots, starting with the Bowline. First, throw the rope over the object you're tying the knot on. Next, you're going to twist the standing end of the rope away from you to make a loop where the standing end is on the bottom and the running end is on the top. Then you'll take your running end and pass it underneath through the hole. Once it's through the hole, pass the running end down and around the standing end of the rope back through the hole the way that you came through. Tighten the rope down. You're not done yet though. Now you gotta make a safety knot. It's the same thing you did with the square knot. Make an overhand knot following the direction of the locking bar, and tighten it down so it's next to the knot with the required length of pigtail. Additionally, for test out purposes, the hole you make with the rope around the object should be big enough to put your fist through, but small enough to where you can't fit your head through it. Before we move on to the next knot, we'll show you a quick way of tying this knot. Throw your rope over the object, tie your standard slip knot, put your running end through the slip knot, pull the slip knot tight to get your bowline, and do the safety knot like you would do normally. Only do it this way if you're confident with your knot tying abilities. Alright, next up is the Clove hitch. This knot is pretty simple. Take your rope and loop it over the object you're tying it on away from you. Go over it again by making a cross, then you take your running end and put it under your cross you just made. Pull it tight and then adjust accordingly for the pigtail length requirement. It's easy to adjust, as the knot is a loose knot that's only tight upon tension. Here's another angle of us tying the knot. Now for the round turn to half hitch. First, make a round turn around the object you're securing this to, going to the right. Take that running end, go around the rope and through the loop, creating a half hitch. Then go around and through once more, making a second half hitch. Cinch the rope down, snug everything up, and make sure your pigtail meets the required length. Here's the same knot again at a different angle. Alright, now it's time to move on to the middle of the line knots, starting with the figure 8 loop. This is another knot that's relatively simple as long as you make sure you don't make any crosses. First, make a bight with your rope. Next, bend the rope as shown on screen. You're now going to take your bight and loop it around the rope. Next, with your left hand, rotate the rope so it creates a teardrop. Next, you're going to feed the bight through that teardrop you just made. All you gotta do now is tighten the rope, making sure that bight can fit at least 2 fingers through, but not enough to fit your fist in. Here's another angle, pulled from our OG video back in 2018 with Nick Nausea. It's the same fundamentals we just discussed, except this way you just maneuver the bight so it forms a figure 8. Fun fact, this shot was filmed at the BRC schoolhouse. Those doors there are to the pool at BRC. With the figure 8 loop out of the way, let's move on to the bowline on a bight. This knot might look tricky at a first glance, but once you get the technique down, it's pretty simple to execute. First thing you do is make a bight with your rope, and then make an overhand knot with that bight. Next, take your hand and put it through the bight, holding on to the overhand knot. Use your other hand and pull the bight downward as shown on screen. At this point, all you gotta do is snug everything down and make it look pretty. Make sure that the loops are of similar size and are big enough to fit 2 fingers through, but not too large where your fist can fit in it. And there's your bowline on a bight. That wraps up the middle of the line knots. The last 4 knots are going to be your specialty knots. As you're about to see, these knots incorporate some of the earlier knots we tied, so these knots do tie in together, pun intended. Kicking off with the first specialty knot is the 4-finger Prusik secured with a bowline. First, wrap your rope to the left over the object you're securing this to. Take that running end and cross it over to the right, going underneath the object you're securing it to and wrapping it back towards you 2 times. You should have 4 fingers after doing this. Tighten everything down and make sure you leave enough of the rope on your running end to be able to make the bowline. The trickiest part is dialing in how much rope you'll need for the bowline safety and pigtail length requirement. Next, take the rope and make a loop, and feed your running end through that loop, behind the line, and back through the loop to make your bowline. There's no safety knot needed on this bowline. Your pigtail must meet the required length, and the space between the bowline and the Prusik must be big enough to fit your fist inside, but not big enough to where you can fit your head in it. Here's another angle of us tying this knot. Alright, the next specialty knot is the directional figure 8. You start this knot off by anchoring the rope with a clove hitch on an object, with the same requirements of the one you made earlier. Once you've got your clove hitch, grab an area of the rope a couple feet away from the clove hitch. Make a bight in the rope and pull it towards the clove hitch, wrapping it around the standing end of the rope, and feeding it through the loop you just made. Cinch the rope down and make it look nice and pretty, making sure the loop can fit 2 fingers, but not your fist. Whichever direction you initially move the bight will lead to the figure 8 facing the opposite way. At BRC, you'll either be asked to make inboard directional figure 8s, where they're towards each other, or outboard figure 8s, where they're away from each other. With time and practice, you'll become familiar with which way you need to go without much thought. There's a quick method of doing this if you want to be a hard charger. Whichever way you want your loop to be, that's the side you're going to flip the opposite of. If you want the figure 8 to go to the left, flip the right side over, then flip flip it towards you, spin it around, and feed it through the loop you just made. Boom, a directional figure 8 in only a few seconds. And here's doing that same thing but in the other direction. Tommy Tinnitus beat Nick Nausea 4 years ago doing this. Nick was so pissed that Tommy got his dip knocked out of his hands. With that out of the way, let's move on to the rappel seat. This one's pretty cool. First, wrap the rope around your waist, making sure that your bitter ends are of the same length and to the front. Next, cross right over left, then take your bitter end that's now on your right side and loop it around so it makes another loop. Now tighten the rope so it's secure on your waist. Now pass both ends of the rope through your legs, where you'll move on to making a bight with both of them with the rope around your waist, going over and under. Next, pull the slack in the rope while simultaneously squatting to get it tight. Bring the ends over to your left hip and secure it with a square knot with a safety on each side. If you skip forward and didn't see the first knot, we show you how to tie this earlier in the video. Don't worry about how long your pigtails are here. You can just tuck it in your pocket. If your rope is too short, you won't be able to tie the safeties, but you'll have one that's long enough if you use our rope or the one they give you in training. And last but not least, the bowline around the body with a figure 8. First, wrap the rope around your torso. Next, you're going to make a bowline secured with a safety knot, exactly like we showed you earlier in the video, except this time your body is the object you're tying it around. The way Tommy does it in the video is a straightforward way of tying the bowline, so follow his lead if you want to make it this way. Through practice and muscle memory, you'll be able to dial in how much slack you need on your working end for the bowline and safety knot. Once the rope is secured around your torso, you're going to make a directional figure 8 loop with the running end of the rope. When you pull your thumb through the figure 8 and fully extend your arm, there should be little to no slack or tension, and you should not be able to fit your fist between the rope and your chest. And there you have it! You just learned how to tie all 12 knots that every recon candidate must know how to do before they step foot in BRC. Just remember that watching this video alone won't cut it. You have to put the time in to practice these knots. Repetition is key. Before you know it, you won't even need this video to tie these knots. On top of the repetition, quality is key too. Getting a high quality rope such as the one in training is nearly impossible to get at a 13-foot length. Do yourself a favor and go buy our recon rope so you can get a feel for what the rope will be like in training. The rope's listed on our website storefront over at gendischarge.com. Go check it out and let us know what you think. The link is in the pinned comment and description below. Well, that is the down and dirty of the 12 recon knots. If you learned something from this video, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel. As always, thank you for watching. Do you even want to be here? A big shout out to all of our YouTube members and our patrons over at our Patreon. Thank you all so much for taking the extra step in supporting our channel. It is much appreciated. If you'd like to be featured on a general discharge video, consider joining our membership with the link in the description or the join button to the left of the subscribe button, or go give our Patreon a look and join the team. Here's Nick Nausea.
All your friends are subscribing to General Discharge and you don't even want to be here.